What if your prayers reach heaven, but you never truly reach God? What if every cry you've ever whispered in desperation was heard, but the relationship you were meant to build was never formed? And what if Padre Pio was shown exactly what happens to a soul that remembers God only when life is breaking, and forgets him the moment the storm passes? This is not a vision of condemnation. This is a vision of compassion, a warning wrapped in mercy, a revelation meant to wake us up before it's too late. Because Padre Pio saw a soul standing before God, a soul that had prayed many times throughout its life, a soul that was sincere, emotional, desperate in its prayers, but a soul that had never learned to stay. And what he witnessed will force you to ask yourself a question you may have been avoiding your entire life. Do you pray to God? Or do you only call on him when you need him? Stay with me, because this vision will reveal whether your prayers are building a relationship or just buying relief. Padre Pio felt the air tighten, as if a quiet sorrow pressed against the room before the vision even began. It wasn't the sorrow of tragedy, nor the weight of judgment. It was the sorrow of something unfinished, something that had tried to reach heaven but never truly arrived. And in that stillness, heaven opened the veil. He saw a soul standing alone in a dim, vast space, not lost, not condemned, but uncertain, like a person who had walked through life without knowing how close or how far they were from God. This soul carried a peculiar fragrance, a mixture of desperation and neglect, the spiritual scent of someone who prayed only when life hurt, and grew silent again as soon as the pain faded. The vision sharpened, and Padre Pio understood this soul well. He had seen thousands like it in the confessional, souls who remembered God only when the world collapsed beneath them, souls who cried out for help in crisis but forgot gratitude, forgot faithfulness, forgot relationship. The soul in the vision looked around, confused. It expected something, comfort, perhaps, or relief. After all, it had prayed many times. But as heaven revealed the hidden reality, Padre Pio saw what the soul could not understand yet. Its prayers had been real, but incomplete, sincere, but only half alive. Then the soul's life began replaying before it, not in scenes, but in patterns. Padre Pio saw moments of prayer bursting like sparks in the darkness, a night of sickness, a moment of fear, a financial collapse, a relationship breaking, a sudden loss, a dangerous accident narrowly avoided, a season of loneliness, a heartbreak that felt unbearable, a diagnosis that frightened the soul into prayer. In these moments, the soul called out with passion, with tears, with urgency. Its voice reached heaven, trembling with sincerity, and heaven always listened. Heaven always responded. Grace always flowed. But then the sparks dimmed, because as soon as life brightened again, the soul stopped praying. The pattern repeated like a beating heart. Sharp, brief, desperate pulses of prayer, followed by long stretches of indifference. Padre Pio saw how the flame of each crisis-born prayer rose beautifully toward God, but without fuel. It always died too early. The soul prayed from pain, not from love. It prayed to escape, not to deepen. It prayed because it had nowhere else to go, not because it wanted God for God's sake. And yet, here was the mystery. God had heard every one of those prayers. He had answered many of them. He had comforted this soul repeatedly in life. The problem wasn't that the prayers were insincere. The problem was that the soul had built no relationship around them. Crisis had driven it to God, but comfort drove it away. This inconsistency now appeared in the soul's spiritual form. Padre Pio noticed something unusual. The soul had light in it, but the light flickered wildly. It glowed brightly in certain places, then disappeared abruptly, leaving patches of shadow. Grace had touched the soul many times, but the soul had never learned to hold on to that grace. Its interior life was a landscape of half-built foundations. Padre Pio felt a deep compassion, not disappointment, not anger, because he understood the truth. Most souls pray this way. They do not reject God, they simply forget him. They do not hate prayer. They simply never mature, beyond fear-based devotion. The vision deepened. Padre Pio saw the soul's first moments after death. It stood before the presence of God, not judgment, but truth, and the soul trembled. Not because God was severe, but because the soul realized for the first time what it had missed. It had prayed for rescue, but not for transformation. It had prayed in need, but not in love. It had prayed from fear, but not from surrender. It had prayed quickly, but never deeply. It had prayed often, but never consistently. It had called out to God, but never walked with him. God had always been near. The soul had rarely stayed. Now, in the light of truth, the soul began to experience the spiritual consequences of a lifetime of interrupted relationship. Padre Pio watched as the soul tried to draw near to the light. It wanted God. It longed for him with genuine hunger, but every step forward was heavy. Every movement felt incomplete. The soul had no strength of intimacy, no depth of trust, no cultivated love. It loved God, yes, but its love had never been trained. A relationship built only in emergencies is a fragile thing. The soul's prayer life had shaped its spiritual muscles, and now those muscles trembled from lack of use. Padre Pio saw grace approach softly, patiently, lovingly. The soul reached toward it instinctively, but even grace felt unfamiliar to it. During life, the soul had only recognized God in trouble. It had never learned to recognize him in peace, and now peace felt strange, almost overwhelming, as if the soul had lived on storms and now didn't know how to breathe in calm. Then heaven revealed a deeper truth. Each crisis-born prayer had indeed created a connection to God, but only momentarily. The soul never strengthened the bond. It never nourished it. It never returned with gratitude. It never deepened the conversation. So the bond formed and dissolved, over and over, leaving the soul with hundreds of thin threads instead of one strong cord of love. Now, as the soul approached eternity, the threads flickered around it like weak lights. They guided the soul toward God, but they could not carry it all the way. Not because God withheld anything, he never does, but because the soul lacked the interior formation that allows a spirit to stand in God's presence without fear. Padre Pio watched the soul's sorrow bloom. It wasn't the sorrow of condemnation. It was the sorrow of lost time, of neglected relationship, of love given only in desperation, of never having learned to pray in the calm, only in the storm. The soul whispered something without sound, a regret that echoed across the vision. Why did I only come to you when life hurt? And heaven answered, not with anger, but with a love so gentle it made Padre Pio's eyes fill with tears, because God had always desired more for this soul. More closeness, more depth, more intimacy, more grace, more transformation. But the soul had only visited. It had never stayed. Padre Pio saw what would happen next. The soul's journey was not over. It was approaching the threshold where heaven would decide, not punishment, but purification, a place where souls like this learn what they never learned on earth: how to pray with love, how to trust without fear, how to walk with God not only in crisis but in eternal relationship. The vision resumed with a quiet intensity, as if heaven itself leaned closer. Padre Pio sensed that what he was about to witness was not only the fate of one soul, but a revelation for countless souls who lived the same way. Those who remembered God only in the valleys of life, not the mountaintops. The soul stood before the light, trembling with longing and regret. It wasn't condemned. It wasn't rejected, but it was unprepared for the fullness of God's presence. The love radiating from the light was too overwhelming, too pure, too steady. Unlike the stopping and starting devotion the soul had offered throughout its earthly life, Padre Pio watched as the light approached, not forcing itself, but waiting, always waiting for the soul's response. At that moment, the soul understood a truth it had never grasped on earth. Heaven is not only a place for those who called out to God, but for those who allowed themselves to be transformed by Him, and transformation requires consistency. The The soul felt its own inconsistency as a weight, not as guilt imposed from above, but as the spiritual consequence of a lifetime of fragmented prayer. Its devotion had been real, maybe even emotional, but never sustained long enough to build virtue, discipline, or intimacy with God. God knew this, and yet his love did not diminish. Padre Pio saw something extraordinary. Grace extended toward the soul like a hand, gentle and inviting. The soul reached toward it instinctively, but each time something within it pulled back: hesitation, fear, unfamiliarity. The soul wanted God, but did not know how to remain with him. That Padre Pio understood was the tragedy of a prayer life rooted only in crisis. The soul learns how to beg, but never how to stay. The light then revealed the soul's inner state more clearly: not damnation, not rebellion, not deliberate refusal, just incompleteness. It was a soul that had survived on spiritual crumbs instead of a feast. A soul that knew how to call God's name, but not how to rest in him. A soul that recognized the Father in storms, but not in the quiet sunrise. A soul that loved God in panic, but not in peace. The angels surrounding the light moved closer, but not to carry the soul upward, not yet. Their presence was gentle, holding a mixture of sorrow and hope. Padre Pio understood their purpose. They were there to lead the soul where it could finally learn everything it had neglected. A realm of purification opened. Unlike his visions of punishment, this place felt like a hospital of the spirit, bright, solemn, tender. A place where souls healed from neglect, inconsistency, and fear. A place where love taught them what they had not learned during life. The soul began to drift toward this realm, not pushed by force, but lifted by divine mercy. Padre Pio sensed the soul's emotions unfolding in layers. First sorrow, then clarity, then humility, then longing. Longing became the strongest. The soul longed to become capable of the love it had experienced only in flashes. Longed to pray not out of fear, but out of desire. Longed to stay with the God it had always approached like a stranger. Padre Pio's heart tightened as he perceived the spiritual law unfolding before him. When a soul prays only in emergencies, it becomes spiritually fragile. When it prays in both hardship and peace, it becomes spiritually strong. Crisis-born prayer is not rejected by God. It is welcomed. But crisis-born prayer alone cannot sustain the soul. The vision shifted again, showing the soul as it entered its purification. Padre Pio saw the soul surrounded by a warm, cleansing light. This light did not burn like fire. It healed, it taught, it strengthened. It expanded the soul's capacity to receive love. The soul felt, perhaps for the first time, what true prayer was supposed to be. Not a plea for rescue, but a relationship. Not a desperate cry, but a daily companionship. Not something reactive, but something foundational. Padre Pio heard the soul whisper something into the light. A whisper that carried all the weight of its new understanding. I did not know you, but I always hoped you heard me. Heaven responded with a tenderness that shook Padre Pio to his core. I heard every word, but I wanted your heart, not your emergencies. The soul broke in holy sorrow, not despair, not fear. Sorrow that purifies, sorrow that opens, sorrow that leads to transformation. Padre Pio felt the next truth wash over him. God never rejects souls who prayed imperfectly, but imperfect prayer makes the journey longer, not because God delays them, but because the soul must grow into the love it never practiced. The soul now began to show signs of change. Its flickering light steadied. Its fragmented interior slowly softened into coherence. It began to understand what it never understood in life, that prayer is not merely asking, it is becoming patient, becoming humble, becoming faithful, becoming capable of heaven. Padre Pio saw visions of this soul's purification stretch far into the spiritual horizon. It would take time, yes, but time does not exist in the same way in eternity. What mattered was the direction. the willingness, the surrender. This soul had surrendered at last. Then came the final revelation of the vision. A revelation Padre Pio knew was meant not only for the soul, but for the living. He saw how God looked at souls who pray only in crisis, not with irritation, not with disappointment, not with frustration, but with compassion, because even a desperate, inconsistent prayer is a doorway. Even a half-formed cry can crack the heart open. Even a moment of panic-driven faith can begin a relationship. But God aches for more. He desires a soul to walk with him through ordinary days, not just through storms. He desires a soul to turn toward him out of love, not only out of fear. He desires a soul to know his presence in quiet peace, not only in desperation. The soul in the vision was now beginning this journey, not in earthly life, but in eternity. And Padre Pio sensed that this was both a warning and an invitation for those still alive. The warning was simple. If you wait until suffering to pray, you will know God in flashes, but not in fullness. The invitation was even simpler. Begin now. Begin while life is calm. Begin while nothing is breaking. Begin while the sun is out. Not only in the storm, the vision faded with a final scene. The soul being gently led into the cleansing embrace of divine love. It was not abandoned. It was not condemned. It was being healed into the soul it was always meant to be. Padre Pio closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the message settle deep within him. One truth echoed above all the others. The soul that prays only in hard moments is not lost, but it must learn in eternity what it did not learn in life. How to love God, not only in need, but in relationship. So what does this mean for you? Right now, at this very moment, ask yourself, when was the last time you prayed? Not because something was wrong, but simply because you wanted to be with God. When was the last time you thanked him, not for fixing a problem, but just for being who he is? When was the last time you turned to him in the quiet, not just in the crisis? If your honest answer is I don't, remember, then you are living the pattern Padre Pio saw. You are building thin threads instead of a strong cord. You are knowing God in flashes instead of fullness. And when your life ends, you will stand where that soul stood. Loved, yes, but unprepared. God does not reject you for this, but he aches for more. He aches for you to know him not as a rescue line, but as a companion, not as an emergency contact, but as a father, not as a last resort, but as your first thought. So begin now, not tomorrow, not when the next crisis hits. Now, pray while your life is calm. Pray while your heart is at peace. Pray while nothing is breaking. Build the relationship now, so that when the storm comes again, and it will, you're not meeting a stranger. You're running to someone you already know. Because the soul that prays only in hard moments is not lost, but it must learn in eternity what it refused to learn in life. And Padre Pio carried that truth with him, knowing that countless souls on earth were still living this same pattern, unaware of how deeply God longed for more. Don't be one of them. Begin today.